Okay, so let's take a look a little bit at the skull, a little bit more in detail, and I'll be using my cursor to point at certain things. So in this case, I'm drawing, or I've drawn the skull in two parts, top and bottom. Obviously, when you think of the skull as a unit of measure, you're including the bottom jaw. So the way that this is displayed, it's pretty easy to follow. We can take the skull or the jaw and move it up, and you'll see where it sits. And of course, I've drawn a side view. So that I will be sending you this, but I'll just go over it real quick. So frontal eminence is the front. Let's go to the side view real quick. It's this part of the forehead. It's literally the forehead. And so eminence means something that juts forward or sticks out. So this is the frontal eminence, your forehead. And right on the side of your temples is the temporal fossa. Fossa basically means like a depression, something that's kind of like concave. So temporal fossa, it's pretty easy to follow. Nasal cavity, pretty self-explanatory. That's where your nose goes. And then what's going to be interesting when we go into muscles and skin and stuff, we can layer this over the bones. So what I would encourage you to do, since you're doing this in Procreate, is save all your layers. So when we get into the muscles, you can simply just draw over the bones, and you'll see how I do it as well. So here's this zygomatic suture. A suture is this little break. Okay, so the exact zygomatic bone is this whole area. There's actually another suture here that separates this front part of the face. So it's basically your cheekbone. Okay, this whole area, and then we'll look at the side view. So this whole area to here. So this is a zygomatic arch. This whole area is your zygomatic bone. Okay. So zygomatic comes from the word zygoma, which means to join or union. So this part joins the front and the side of the skull, or at least this part of the face. Okay. And I'm not labeling every single thing. We're just gonna label the main things that create landmarks. Okay, so where muscle attaches to bone, where muscle groups in certain areas and creates form. That is why we look at certain areas of bones and name them so that we know where the origin and the insertion points are. This whole area, the whole jaw, is called the mandible. Okay, so it's pretty easy. And then mental protuberance. Obviously, protuberance means something that sticks forward. They could have said eminence, but instead they said protuberance. And mental is Latin for chin. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Nothing too complicated. The only thing that you're gonna have to spend time is drawing a skull to this amount of detail. This is what you're gonna require. So you can do this from a photo. I did this from a photo, and I have a couple of anatomy books, and I kind of simplified uh, where the labeling is going to go. And I did this in two layers, so I'll go ahead and show you what I did. Let's see if I can find my layer here. So if you look here, see, so I have the jaw separate, and I can move the jaw if I need to, put it in place. Does that make sense? So you can see kind of how high up the jawbone is. So you might consider doing something similar. Now let's look at the side view. Kind of a similar thing. Let me just zoom up a little bit. So, same thing, frontal eminence, that's your forehead. Here's your nasal bone right there. This is known as the maxilla. Okay, this is where your facial muscles attach to. They attach to the cheek here and then down or just above where your gum line would go. So expressions that happen in the cheek, this is where a muscle's attached. And then you have the parietal bone here. There's more to the parietal bone, but all you have to know is, this is the parietal bone. This area here. And then this is part of, it actually goes down like this. So this whole area is the parietal bone. Because the skull is actually split into sections so you can see these sutures. This is the temporal line. This is pretty important because this is usually covered with muscle. And this is what makes up your temples. So the muscle actually attaches here. You'll see tendon and then muscle. So when we start layering this is kind of the view that you want to have. And the same thing with the bottom half of the jaw. We can move that up. The occipital, that's a pretty important one. That's just the back of the skull, okay? And then again, of course, we have the zygomatic arch right here. Here's your zygomatic suture. Here's the arch, okay? And when we layer, you'll see exactly where the ear goes, right? There's a little auditory, what's called the auditory hiatus. So the ear is gonna be like right here, okay? So you can kind of feel around in your own face where some of these bones are at. Coracoid process. I know this is part of the jaw, but there are muscles that attach themselves to anything called a process. Here's a mastoid process, or excuse me, a styloid process. That's the sharp part here. And then the mastoid process here is this lump, okay? That kind of keeps the jaw in place. And you can actually feel this if you feel behind your ear. There's kind of a big lump right there. And if you look at the bottom of the skull, I didn't do a drawing of the bottom of the skull, but if you look at the bottom of the skull, there's a hole right in here. And this mastoid process sits on top of the body of the first vertebrae, the first cervical vertebrae, which is called the atlas. So I think, and that's what we're going to talk about next. And so what I'll do is do a couple of different views and then sort of pull it into this so you can see, and I'll hide all of this text. Okay. So here we go again. Here's the mandible and then the mental protuberance. I obviously spelled that wrong, but there you go. Okay, so let's get going on the vertebrae. Okay, so I'm going to try, and this is going to be kind of as thorough as I can make it. And feel free to watch this a couple of times if you have to. And I'll try to do a simplified view. So what we're going to be doing is a view, what is known as a superior view, which basically means looking at it from top, looking down at it. And I'll show you what I mean. So the basic shape okay, and I'll try to explain how this all fits. And then when we do our session in person, this will make a lot more sense. Okay, so remember those condyles that I was talking about? They rest here. So this is flat. And then there's a little hollow opening here because that's where nerves run through your spinal cord. And this will make more sense when you see the other views. Okay, so I'm just trying to draw a little bit of shadow to give you an idea. Okay, and then we have this opening here, where the middle part of the spine goes. And I am simplifying this as much as I can, just so it's not too confusing. And then you have another base like here. Okay. And then the same, another opening on the other side. Okay. So this is us looking down into it. Now let's look at, I'm going to draw a line, trying to keep myself in line. Okay, now we're going to do a side view. Okay, so this is the atlas top view, also known as the first cervical vertebrae. Okay, so this is neck. Okay, so this is right after the skull. So here's what we have as a side view. And again, you can simplify this even more. And I'm trying to give you something that is both kind of accurate and simple enough that you can get an idea. Okay, so we're not gonna learn all of these because that's a lot, and you really only have to know 4. Okay, so remember, inside of here is hollow like this, and then that's this wing. Okay, it helps to see different views because you might not know exactly what you're looking at. And if you have that app, you can use that as well to kind of clarify. But this will kind of give you something to start with. Okay, so this is a side view. Okay, now we're going to do a back view and a front view. So to the right will be a front view. So I'll just draw a line to keep it the same height. And this also has something similar at the bottom because this has to sit on top of another vertebrae, right? The second vertebrae. And the second vertebrae is known as the axis. Okay, so this kind of looks like I don't know, I think it kind of looks like a letter M a little bit. Maybe that's a little bit too nerdy or a little too weird, but I kind of draw like a letter M, and then I add the wings. Okay, and then obviously this goes to the back, and then this is this part. Hopefully this kind of makes sense. And the same thing on this other side. Okay, pretty easy so far, I think. You know, it's a little bit weird if you don't know what you're looking at. I'll try to explain as much as I can, and we'll try to put this in context. Okay, so just the exact opposite. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of draw through this. And some of this stuff is going to be obscured, but it's kind of important just to get the concept of some of these things. So okay, and then I'll erase. Here's, you see this part, right? That's the top part, and then it obviously has it at the bottom. So there's those flat spots. Okay, so now this back side, you're gonna be able to see it here. Oh, I didn't give myself enough room there. Hopefully that makes sense. And then obviously you won't be able to see through that. Okay, so let's go back. This is a front view, back or rear. Okay, so far so good, I'm hoping. Well, let's go down to the bottom. So next one is going to be same thing as up here, looking down, and then this is the axis. So this is a little bit, I'll show you exactly what happens. They stack on top of each other. So now the interesting thing about these two is the size relationship. The axis is quite a bit bigger. It's not huge, but it is larger. So we have something that kind of looks like this at first, and then it's got like a it's got like a little tail. And another flat spot because this needs to sit on something. And they're sort of at the correct angle. So they're not totally flat. They're flat-ish. They're flat and then at a certain angle. So it's a plane at an angle. Okay. And then there's this little head, and I think it kind of looks like a little bird. You'll see the other view. This is actually sticking up. I'm trying to show that by adding a little shading. And again, you don't have to get these 100% correct. You just have to know the general shape. And then the order helps a little bit. And again, I might be giving you the nerdy version of this, but I think this is kind of interesting. So better, the reason that you overlearn anatomy is because what you will end up retaining will be the absolute essence. Whereas if you underteach it, then you'll retain less than what you're supposed to. Okay, so hollow again. So here's the top view. Axis. Second cervical vertebrae. I should revert. Okay, so let's do a view. Okay, so remember that little head, this part right here, and I'll show you what happens. This sits up inside there. I'll show you the locked position. So this part right here is here. And again, also a little opening so the nerves can run through. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, yeah, I did I did practice all this before making this video. You know, and I've learned this before, but it always helps to practice a little bit as a refresher. I've taught this a couple of times. Okay. And then what I'll do is just copy this and then show you exactly how it fits in the stack position. Okay, so this is the side view. And then I'll show you what the four look like. Okay, so this will be a front. I'll try to get myself a little bit more space. So I think it looks kind of like a little bird from here, from this position. Again, here's that kind of slanted. I guess it's not so much of an M shape, but kind of like a really distorted one. Flat areas, again, because it's got to sit on another vertebrae. And then here's this tail part. And of course that's sitting in the back, so it goes away from this. I'll try to draw this in shadow. Okay, so this is the rear view. And then here's where we're gonna have same thing. It's kind of the head. Yeah, bones are kind of weird, you know, especially when you take a close look at them. Here's that little weird little tail part. Okay, let me just save this real quick. Okay, so this is how they fit. Okay. This might, yeah, this is pretty close. Um, this wing actually locks in, so I'm gonna scale this down a little bit. So just like that. You wouldn't be able to see this, obviously, but this is how they link. And let me label this for you. So this would be first vertebrae, second, and I like to label them this way. And this is the atlas, and this is the axis. Okay, so that's what it would look like. And what they will do, just ignore this stuff. What will happen is they will, let me change color here. They're going to follow this pattern. So eventually they'll curve. So you have 1, 2, you have 3. Try black again. So you'll have your third. Okay, because it'll stop about here. And then you'll have your fourth. Fifth. Sixth. And then your seventh cervical spine. Okay. So the ones that we're mostly concerned with is first, second, and seventh. And then the seventh cervical spine. Well, this also follows a curvature. And it's not perfect because some of these bones are different sizes. So it'll kind of come in and kind of come out. But I'll give you the gist. It'll kind of sit like that. Something like this. And it has a wing right there. This is the wing. And this is a kind of a depression because this is where the nerves fit in. Okay? So what you'll end up with is something like this. So basically what you kind of want to end up with is a curve like that, and then the skull. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So that's it for now. Okay, so here we have an example of the atlas and axis. Okay. So here, this is the atlas. Here's the axis. Let's turn this skeleton, as you can see from the front. And if you remember, there's a little part of the head that fits in. So there it is. And you can see how these little areas here, right? So you see that. So after the second cervical spine, you have these discs that provide cushion for compression. Now let's see how the skull fits. Okay, so here we have the skull, taking it off. Let's see if I can find how to slip it on. Okay, so the way that the skull sits, if you remember, you see there's a hole. Okay. So there's a hole inside the skull. And here you have a different process. But inside, you have 1 and 2. So there's actually another section, and that rides on top of the atlas. I don't know if you can see that. So as the head turns, if I lift, you'll see where it sits on the bone. So I hope this provides a little bit of clarity so you can kind of see. And I'll do a drawing as well. Okay, so here we have just one more reiteration of where the skull, how it sits on the spine. So this is a bottom view of the skull. Okay, and then I'll just label a couple of these things so that you can have your reference. Obviously, this is the top of the mouth. And here's the mastoid process. And you can look at one of the other views. And this area here, I'll change color so you can, is simply known as a condyle. Okay, so here's the cavity, and the brain is in here, and then the brain stem and all of the nerve endings, and including the vagus nerve, run through this empty part inside of, if you remember the cervical, these are empty inside here. So it runs all the way through. Okay. And I'll label it just as condyle. But basically, I mean, it doesn't have a fancy name. It is called a condyle. That is what sits and rocks. Let's get a closer view. It sits right here. So again, let me switch to a colorful. It sits right on this notch. Okay. And so let's find a view. So here's a view. They put too many cervical spines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And this should be the 7th. Okay, so ignore this one. And like I said, there's just underneath this, you won't be able to see it, but it basically sits something like that. And I will insert a video, or I will have inserted a little video that kind of helps to explain all of this. So there you have it. And so this kind of completes our first evaluation of the neck, and I'll include all of these images as JPEG so you can follow along. All right.